Welcome to Summer of Sega episode 7, and today we'll be doing a Dreamcast triple feature using 3 fighting games on the console. And we're going to start off with Soul Calibur by Namco. This is still my favorite game in the entire Soul Calibur series, and is one of my favorite fighting games on the Dreamcast. Graphically, it's one of the best games on the system. If you really look at the PS2, GameCube, and Xbox versions of Soul Calibur 2 several years later, graphically it really isn't that much better than Soul Calibur on the Dreamcast. This one is really pretty. It's one of the smoothest fighters I've ever played. It's one of the premier series as far as weapons-based combat. It's a great arcadey fighting game that has a ton of fantastic, memorable characters, plenty of different fighting styles to fit any taste. The arenas are interesting. They really make a good use of ring outs. They're actually really fun to try and pull off. They don't seem kind of gimmicky. There isn't a whole lot as far as using the environment to your advantage, but instead they go through a lot of things in mission mode where you have your normal modes, arcade, you have versus, you have team battle, you have survival, extra survival, all the basic modes. Then you go into mission mode where with each character you take them through the story of their journey through the world of Soul Calibur and do all these different missions around this huge giant map of the world. And this to me is where Soul Calibur is really interesting, and where this one in particular is actually better in my opinion than all the newer ones that came out later. In mission mode, it's very similar to a lot of the other Soul Caliburs, where you'll go around the world and each different area will have maybe a coliseum where you earn money for certain fights, or you have different ones where if you hit the ground, you're poisoned until you knock your opponent to the ground, then they become poisoned. Ones where if you hit certain, like a wall in this arena, you'll explode. All these different things. The ones where the enemy is invisible except their weapon, time limits, your health slowly depleting, areas where there's a huge gust of wind that's slowly pushing you off the level. Tons of different challenges, just a lot of fun, and equally as good as any game in the series that came before or after. Where I think it's superior is what you unlock during mission mode as you go through with each character. In later ones, and even in Soul Edge or Soul Blade, depending on where you live on the PS1, the focus was a lot more on unlocking new weapons for characters to use, and sometimes money towards different pieces of equipment or just attire to change the look of a character. There's a lot on that. And in Soul Calibur, there's not a lot of that. Instead, most of what you unlock, the focus is more on images. And I like it because of what it is. There are over 300 images that you unlock, all these different sets, and they're anything from still images of the game to early CG artwork to early concept art from the characters. There's even several categories of fan art from fans playing the arcade game, mostly in Japan. There's all kinds of pictures of like posters from around the world for the game, all this sort of behind the scenes stuff, a lot of really interesting artwork. You unlock the prologues and epilogues for each character. To me, I didn't feel that the gameplay lost anything by not having all those different item acquisitions and sort of like item upgrades and weapon upgrades. I felt like it actually got a little bit more out of using all the different new and creative and interesting artwork. I like seeing the sort of behind the scenes stuff and the fan art. I like seeing the posters and having the epilogues and prologues unlocked and all that different stuff. I really felt it added more to the overall experience of Soul Calibur beyond just the gameplay. Because the gameplay is as close to perfection as you can get for a weapons-based fighting game. It's really good. It feels great on the Dreamcast controller. It feels perfectly at home. Some people have complained where the Dreamcast doesn't necessarily have the best D-pad in the world. I personally like it, but I can see some people complaining because you can use the analog stick, obviously, because it's a really good 3D roaming battlefield. You can really kind of work your way around the enemy nicely. But for that type of game, I still personally prefer using a D-pad for most fighting games, unless it's sort of an arena fighter or something like Power Stones. But for this type of thing, I could see that being possibly a complaint, but other than that, the control is fantastic. In every way, it really holds up to, again, even the later games. If you played Soul Calibur 2, which a lot of people did since it was on sort of the 3 successor systems, was on GameCube. They had a different version on the Xbox with Spawn. You had, of course, you had Link on GameCube, and you had Heihachi on the PS2. I suggest if you've missed this one, go back and play it, and it's just as fun with multiplayer as Soul Calibur 2, 3, 4, 5, what have you. Just as fun, still holds up graphically. it's still fantastic. It looks beautiful. It has beautiful particle effects. It has just great detail in the characters, and everything's very, very smooth and like somewhat shiny. It really, everything just kind of has this rounded edge pop to it that a lot of Dreamcast games have. It's really a standout title and a fantastic fighting game. Like I said, there are very few complaints that I can pick out, and if they are, it's really nitpicks. I do kind of wish, even though I said that I really prefer all the artwork and things that you unlocked, I do kind of wish there was even maybe one or two more additions of more equipment and items that you can get. Again, that's just wishing for an extra. It's wishing for more than what's already here, which is fantastic, so it's not really a complaint. So, an amazing fighting game, Soul Calibur. Next up is Virtua Fighter 3. And Virtua Fighter 3 to me is kind of a bit of a surprise because this one actually came from Sega itself, Sega's AM2 studio, which is more directly towards its arcade games, and of course Virtua Fighter being something that's a very arcade-based fighting series. It's a good fighting game, but really not a great fighting game, and it was a big disappointment for me just because it was something that came directly from Sega. I really thought it was going to utilize a lot of the features on the Dreamcast and really be a stellar fighting game, and it's really just okay in comparison to a lot of fighting games made by non-Sega companies, which I found somewhat odd. Just to sort of prove a point there is absolutely no VMU compatibility at all. I mean, you can save to the VMU, but there's no activity at all in the VMU when you're playing Virtua Fighter 3, which is extremely odd. Very, very, very few games actually don't have any images or any interaction with the VMU, even completely outside companies or ports from, say, the PS1 to the Dreamcast. Those ports came with a lot of VMU functionality. This was a game made from arcades directly to the Dreamcast from Sega itself without any sort of VMU usage. It was a really odd thing. And then on top of that, after you've played sort of prettier fighters, something like Soul Calibur, which came out around the same time, it really just graphically falls short. It's definitely an improvement over any of the ports of Virtua Fighter 2, whether you're playing it on the Saturn or the 32X version or Genesis or whatever. It really is a step up, but not as much of a step up as I was expecting. It's something where it looks only slightly beyond what something like the PS1 could pull off. It's definitely something that's a little bit past that capability, but it's really not stellar. It doesn't blow your mind. It doesn't really throw that, hey, I'm next gen, the way Soul Calibur does. You put in Soul Calibur and you just watch the beginning, and when you're just coming off something like the PlayStation or the Saturn or the N64, it's like, holy crap, this is the next gen, this is the next level, this is going to be great, this is beautiful. And then you put in Virtua Fighter 3 and it's like, alright, it's a little bit better, not that much better. It kind of reminds me now of seeing a lot of early PS4 games going from PS3 to PS4. There isn't really a big leap. You'll see certain effects that really wouldn't be able to pull off on the 360 or the PS3 on something like a PS4, but it's really not a huge leap. It's just sort of a slight step forward. Graphically, that's kind of the story of Virtua Fighter 3, but gameplay-wise, it's a different story. It is very, very bare bones as far as the number of options, just the standard sort of arcade modes and versus modes and team battle modes. Nothing really special, nothing to hold up, nothing extra. But the gameplay itself is very, very good. It's a very strategic fighting series. It's not like a lot of other ones where you can just sort of button mash. Even Soul Calibur. Soul Calibur is one where it's incredibly accessible because it's very, very easy to learn. Anyone can pick up and play, but it's very hard to master. So you can play against anyone, but you then eventually get these sort of expert players coming in and just sort of crushing you because there are a lot of technicalities, a lot of really just wonderful, fluid, technical movements you can learn, but there is sort of that base level where anyone can at least do the basics. Virtua Fighter is a little bit different. I feel like it's something where you have to be skilled to begin with. It's not really accessible to people that aren't really good at fighting games. A lot of it comes from, it's much more focused on timing and timing blocks and timing shifting around your opponent and timing different grappling moves than it is just sort of punching and kicking. You're not going to get as far just slamming on sort of the punch button or the kick button. You really have to focus on shifting around your opponent and really paying more attention to your positioning and your distance from your opponent and sort of blocking and countering really quickly and getting up close and doing a lot of those grappling moves for a lot of big damage. It's a very technical fighter, and it's very fun, and it's particularly fun for people that are really into fighting games. Again, not an accessible game, and incredibly bare bones as far as the options. Unless you're really, really big into Virtua Fighter, after a while, it really just kind of loses that fun factor, even for a big fighting game fan, just because of the lack of content. You have a lot of favorite characters, but it's not really a huge roster, and with that limited number of modes, after a while, I mean 10, 15 hours of playing it on your own and with friends, there's not a whole lot left to do. So a decent fighting game on the system, but again, something that really falls short and didn't really use the capabilities of the Dreamcast at all in any way, and a very surprising title. So decent, but really not great. Check it out if you do like Virtua Fighter, or if you're really into fighting games on the Dreamcast, or if you're someone who prefers older sort of arcade style fighting games rather than some of the newer titles. This is definitely something to look up, but don't pay a lot of money for it. It's really not worth getting, more than like the $5 to $10 range. A good game, but not great. And one last thing I almost forgot to mention about Virtua Fighter 3, there is one additional thing called the history mode, which is a sort of really short behind the scenes of the series of Virtua Fighter. It goes through and shows you the wireframes and then character models, a little bit of texturing, and like a few seconds of gameplay of Virtua Fighter 1, 2, and 3. It's only a couple minutes long, and there's not really any like heavy interviews or anything like that. It's just a very short sort of look into the history of Virtua Fighter. It's a nice little addition, but it's something where it doesn't really add a lot because it's so short. You watch it once and it's like, okay, that was interesting. That's about it. I kind of wish it was either not there and there was another actual gameplay mode, or if it was there, it was something more in-depth with actual history and interviews and things. So it's an interesting little thing, but it has that same sensation as the whole rest of the game, where it's just very bare bones. And last is Dead or Alive 2 by Tecmo, and this for me is my preferred version of this game. It was later ported to the PlayStation 2 as a launch title as Dead or Alive Hardcore, which you see right here, but I do actually like the Dreamcast version better. There are a few things in Hardcore that are considered improvements, but I actually think it makes the game worse. To begin with, the PS2 version adds these sort of J.J. Abrams lens flares to a lot of the levels to add sort of a bit more like glitz and shine to it, and some of the sort of explosions and like shocks of lightning and and one of the arena stages are a little bit more verbose than in the Dreamcast version, but I actually think it distracts and takes away from a lot of the visuals. It's a little bit too much and really just pulls you out of the beauty of the stages. And a lot of the stages in this game are simply gorgeous. They're really up there with something like Soul Calibur on the system as far as the 3D fighters. Just beautiful, beautiful effects. The character models look great. Everything moves very fluidly and smoothly. There are no frame rate issues. There's no tearing. Just absolutely nothing. It is a nearly flawless visual performance for the time. One thing where it does succeed and goes beyond something like Soul Calibur is its usage of the environments, something that Dead or Alive as a series has done pretty well over the years, but I think this one was really a big showcase early on for how this game is not, it's something that's known for its very sort of busty female fighters, and it's not about that. It's something where it actually is a very, very technical fighter where you have to use a lot of tactics, in some ways similar to something like Virtua Fighter, where you have to use a lot of positioning, a lot of grab moves, a lot of sort of almost a rock, paper, scissors style of combat where certain moves will sort of counter another. It's a big game based on countering moves. A lot of counterattacks tend to be more important than just straight attacking. And it uses the environment in a way where it's a nice 3D movement fighter. You have very nice sort of almost free roaming. And there's a lot of stages where you can push someone through a window and they'll go down to the next sort of level outside a building and smash to the ground, do a ton of damage, jump and follow after them. Or you can push them over a balcony, or you can push them through this or through that. Or the one stage is an enclosed arena where if you slam them up against the wall, they'll be shocked, or there'll be a tiny explosion that'll do a bunch of damage. And there's a lot of using the environment tactically that isn't in a lot of fighting games, especially back then. Now you see that a lot more, but back when this came out on the Dreamcast, there weren't that many games that really did that, and if they did it, they really didn't do it as well as this. For me, I do like the Dreamcast visuals better than the PlayStation 2. Again, I feel like the way the polygons are rendered on the Dreamcast with that sort of rounded edge versus the very triangular shape in the PS2 means I really do like sort of the way the edges of forms are shaped on the Dreamcast, and the way there is sort of this almost 3D-ish pop between characters and environments. I do think it looks better. I think it looks a little bit smoother than the PlayStation 2 version, and doesn't have, again, all those sort of cheap little effects added in, like the lens flares that just kind of are unnecessary. It's a wonderful fighting game. It does have, again, only kind of standard modes, arcade and team battle and everything like that, but unlike Virtua Fighter, the characters are more interesting. There's more to unlock as far as costumes and things, and it stays more interesting longer than something like that. And I did enjoy it a lot more than Virtua Fighter 3. As far as comparing the three games, Virtua Fighter 3 again, decent, definitely the worst of the three. Soul Calibur, I feel, has more one-player content than any of the three. So if you're not constantly able to play with friends, it's something that will have more content for you, and you'll be able to enjoy a fighting game, something that's traditionally a very multiplayer-focused thing, just as one player, more than Soul Calibur. And overall, I feel it has the second best two-player content behind Dead or Alive 2. So between them, I'd say it's kind of an almost exact tie between Soul Calibur and Dead or Alive 2. Both fantastic games. I think overall the gameplay is a little bit better in Soul Calibur, and it provides a little more overall content, but I do think visually Dead or Alive 2 for me stands out a little bit more, and I do sort of like the fluidity, and I do like a lot of the characters better. Overall, though, it really depends on your taste. If you want a weapons-based combat fighting game with a little bit more of a story and background, go for Soul Calibur. If you want something that's more just a straightforward, fun, and challenging fighting game to play by yourself or mostly multiplayer, pick Dead or Alive 2. And if you want more than one game, or if you want to try and get all three, then pick Virtua Fighter 3, but it would definitely not be my first choice. These are all, though, three really good fighting games for the system. Dreamcast does have a lot of really great fighting games, both 2D and 3D. Just decided to pick these ones out today because I felt they're very easy to compare between the three. There are a lot of similarities into what they were doing or trying to do, and as far as when they came out, as far as releases, three good fighting games for you to check out on the Dreamcast.